Hi guys, so I just finished the new Bobiverse book and we can finally talk about it. So the fifth book in the series, Not Till We Are Lost by Dennis E. Taylor, was just released a few weeks ago, and it actually marks the 10th anniversary of the Bobiverse series because the first book, We Are Legion, We Are Bob, was released in 2014. And now, 10 years later, we already have the fifth book in the series, and what a journey it has been. So the Bobiverse series is, up until now, I would say one of my favorite science fiction series, and I was very much excited for this new release. And in preparation to, listening to the fifth book, I wanted to be, up to date. So I reread or re-listened from book 1 to book 4. And I also did a full review on the series until book 4, Heaven's River. And if you haven't watched that video yet, go back and watch that video first. So I have a few main topics that I want to get into, that I want to discuss in this review here. And I want to start out with the general plot and where, things finished and where we left off in the fourth book, Heaven's River, and where things kind of start off in the fifth book, Not Till We Are Lost. So at the end of the fourth book and the beginning of the fifth book, the Bobiverse, the Bobs are very much divided. There are so many different fractions now, and there's been so much personality shift with all these newer generation Bobs that there's really a lot of friction and conflict in the Bobiverse, and also with with the humans and with different intelligent species. So things overall are not as harmonious as they once used to be in the Bobiverse, and that's where we start off in Not Till We Are Lost. And we actually start off with two characters that we didn't hear a lot yet in the first four books, although they had a very important mission. And we start off with Icarus and Daedalus. Daedalus? Is that correct? Icarus and Daedalus? Yeah. They are being called Iki and They, or they call each other Iki and They, which is much easier to pronounce for me. And I do know the background of these names, and I actually like the naming of these two Bobs very much. So last when we heard of Iki and They was, I believe, at the end of book 3, probably, when they were destroying the home planet of the otters, the very aggressive species that was trying to destroy basically everything. And since then we haven't heard much of them, but Iki and they are exploring a lot of very interesting things at the beginning of book number 5. And then we also, of course, have the, I would say, almost main characters, because you always go back to these original Bobs. So we have Bob, and Bob is kind of dealing with the aftermath of Heaven's River. So he is supporting Anak, the artificial intelligence of Heaven's River. He's supporting Anak with creating a virtual reality for the local habitants, for the Quinlands. So Bob is busy working on that. Bill, he is, back at Epsilon Eridani, working in his workshop and working on a few projects as always. And then we also have Hugh with the Skippies. They are with the information and with the kind of technology and knowledge that they got from Anak in Heaven's River. They are working on creating their own fully artificial intelligence, which turns out to be quite a dangerous undertaking. And Starfleet is still somewhere loose in the system as well, and there's still a lot of mysteries actually around them and how they came into existence, and that's kind of where we start off in the beginning of this fifth book in the Bobiverse. It takes a while until we get back to some of the usual other characters like Howard and Pritchard. I think it's almost after 1/3 of the book when we first hear of Howard and Pritchard. Although their storyline at the end of the book becomes very much important, and I do like the kind of spreading out of the characters and storylines a little bit more here, but we talk about that a little bit later again. And that's where everybody is at the beginning of this book. One thing that I wanted to talk about is I found very interesting that the style of the naming of the books, I feel we had very similar naming of the books from book 1 to book 3, with, We Are Legion, all these worlds, we are many. So those are all kind of, have a similar style to me, and I always liked that kind of naming pattern for these books. And then book 4 happened, and it was just called Heaven's River, which just turned out to be the name of the setting of most of the story in the book. And I kind of felt that somehow just didn't really fit into with the other 3 books. And now coming back to book number 5 with this name, Not Till We Are Lost, I feel it's kind of back to the roots in terms of naming. I don't really know how to describe it, but the names for book 1 to 3 and this now as well, book number 5, they feel like they are following some sort of pattern. I don't know, they seem very similar to me, and I absolutely love the naming of these books. So even just looking at the name of the book before starting out to listen to it, I had very high hopes for this book, that we would go back to the original recipe of the Bobiverse books again, and the return from Heaven's River that focused on one plot point, basically. So my hopes were high going into Not Till We Are Lost, and I have to say I was not disappointed at all. So next I want to talk about plot lines a little bit, because I feel that what was a little bit new in this book is that it's far more integrated into the other books, and already setting up book 6, I would say. So while with the other books we always had like a very much a continuation of the previous book, so when book 1 finishes, book 2 basically immediately takes up the plot and the premise from that point on, and there is this continuation of the story going on. But what we now, I feel like the first time here have with book 5 is that it's much more connected to the whole storyline, and it kind of is plotting out storylines into the future already. So it feels like Dennis E. Taylor has now shifted from writing books with a very clear beginning and end in this Bobiverse to starting to write books that are much more connected in their plot lines with each other. And I do feel that would be a great direction to go. I love, how certain things are resolved from older books. So for example, in here we found out more about the origins of Starfleet and things like that. So it feels much more interconnected here. Overall, I also feel that the plot lines that are in this book very much appeal to me. So, for example, we have the plot line with a rebel AI, and what could be more current in today's days than a potential rebel AI on the loose. So I found that very engaging. Then also all those new species that are discovered in the book. So for example, I absolutely loved the storyline with the dragons, with Howard and Bridget. That was fantastic. And then third, the discoveries that Day and Iki make with the wormholes and the Imperium and all these species and all these planets that seem to have, being fully built and have infrastructure, but there's just no people and nobody around, and that kind of mystery drags on very long until the end of the book. So I found that very refreshing and engaging. Now, one thing that I would like to criticize a little bit, there were not a lot of like satisfying interactions, or I would say wins for the Bob in here. So in the past books, we always have like the Bobs, struggling with some situation. For example, when they were dealing with Vehement, and they, for many chapters, they were not able to get the best of them. But then when it finally happened, it felt so satisfying. We were so happy that, they were actually able to dismantle Vehement, basically. And the same thing happened with the others and other kind of situation, where it just felt very satisfying after, a lot of struggle, when Bobs were finally on top of things again and were able to kind of, take their revenge and end up on top again. And I don't feel like we have a lot of these situations in the 5th book. So it always feels like that the stakes are quite low, and we don't get the kind of satisfying big win or big fight at the end of this book that we had in many of the other books. So I felt that was a little bit underwhelming, unfortunately. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the writing style of the book. So for this book again, what was very positive for me is that it was really back to the roots again. The story was much more spread out over all these different kind of stories, and it was not like, one of the stories was the main plot and everything else was just kind of an add-on that was not that important. No, here it really felt again that we have all these storylines, we have all these point of views of different Bobs, and all of them are important in their own way. That's how I felt from book 1 to 3. And I'm very glad that we are back to this kind of situation now with Not Till We Are Lost. Now, the funny thing is, writing down my notes for this video, I actually didn't know how to write some of the characters or some of the names. So, for example, I forgot how to write Quinlan's. I don't know. Because most of the time when I'm reading Bobiverse, I'm actually listening to it. Because the Audible books by Ray Porter are just so amazingly narrated that I don't understand why you would ever want to read the Bobiverse, because these audiobooks are absolutely amazing. And at the point of this review and this video, I'm not even sure if there is a written book out yet, because it says Audible Original. So maybe somebody can bring some light into the situation. What is going on here? Are they releasing the book later? Is that common practice for the Bobiverse? I'm not quite sure, but I really don't mind, because I would want to listen to the audiobook anyway. Like, Ray Porter is able to bring that much diversity and distinct voices into those different kind of Bobs. You hear him speaking a few lines and you can immediately tell with many of the popular Bobs, you can immediately tell, oh, this is Bob, this is Will, this is Howard, because they all have their distinctive way of speaking, they all have their distinctive voice. I'm sure a lot of it also comes from the writing of Tennessee Taylor, but Ray Porter with his narration is just able to put an additional layer on top of it that makes this listening experience so amazing for me, and I absolutely recommend to, whenever you are wanting to start to get into the Bobiverse, please listen to the audiobook, don't read these books. And the writing again from Tennessee Taylor, it's a wonderful mix of hard science to humorous and sarcasm, and there's some drama to it as well. There's exploration, and there's basically everything in here. And I really very much enjoy Tennessee Taylor's writing. It's also, although many of these topics are very complex that he writes about and explains, I feel that his writing is very easy to understand. He keeps things very simple whenever possible, and there is a lot of dialogue, which if you've guys seen any of my reviews before, I absolutely love books with a lot of dialogue, because I feel that it makes the plot move quicker. If I feel that it makes for a fast-paced book, which I absolutely enjoy. So I do really enjoy dialogue-heavy books, and these Bobiverse books definitely are those kind of books. Then let's get a little bit into themes and world building, because I really think while the basis for the Bobiverse has been laid for many books, but I really do feel like Tennessee Taylor is now starting to get into long-term world building. You may see it as a setup for future books, but I do feel that it has a very interesting story in itself, and I really did enjoy listening to it. But it's very clear that with this big huge cliffhanger at the end of the book, it's not something that would be resolved in one additional book, number 6. No, there is gonna be books 6, 7, 8. I don't know how many books. I remember from one of Tennessee Taylor's blog posts on his website, he has, I think he had in mind writing 10 books at least, although he did say that's not a given, but it does feel like we are now in the territory of long-term planning that he is doing here. Yeah, so it seems like there's many more books to come, and I'm absolutely here for it. And it does seem like the Bobiverse can never catch a break. So whenever they finally are able to resolve some sort of issue, like in this book, they are actually having their fair share of troubles on many different plot lines, and they're finally able to resolve some of these issues. Like they're rescuing a new species just to find out that there's going to be much more trouble in the future coming. So they really can never catch a break, and it's just kind of exponentially getting worse and worse for everybody in this universe. One of the plot points that I found very interesting in this book was when they and Iki, they first in this whole universe, they stumble upon a new species that they have to communicate with, but they don't have the opportunity as they usually had with other new species, where they could, go in first and through drones find books and learn about the species, learn the language, and then start to communicate with them. So in this situation now, they are in a situation where they don't have the opportunity to first learn the language. They don't have the means to learn the language. They don't know about this other species yet. But they are suddenly placed in a situation where they have to communicate. They are really having a hard time to start to communicate and find a basis in language. And the interesting thing there I found was that it's actually happening in a very similar way as if you've read Hail Mary by Andy Weir, when the protagonist of that book gets in touch with an alien species and they start to slowly build a common language. It's very similar to what happens here in the Bobiverse. So what happens is that they first, lay the ground or the basis with mathematical concepts. They start to talk about math, and then they go into like simple physics, and then they slowly build on top of that with language, with verbs, and it takes a long time to get to a point where they are actually able to communicate to a certain extent. And I found that to be very realistically done, and I found it to be absolutely interesting. I guess another example would be the movie Arrival, where they also have to start to communicate with an alien species that is basically just doing hand signals. And it's very difficult. Well, where do you start off? But all these stories come to the same conclusion, I guess, that you have to start with the basics that are given in the universe, which is maths, which is physics. That should be the same everywhere, and then you start to build on top of that. So next, I want to talk a little bit about the characters. And what I found a little bit unusual and also a little bit of a pity here is that there's very little interaction with human beings nowadays. Although I guess that's a little bit of a continuation of the story, because as much as they start discovering new species, their kind of attention gets divided onto all these different species. But in this book, we had almost no communication or no contact between the Bobs and humans. There's probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 very short dialogues between a Bob and a human in this book. And other than that, it's mostly conversations between the Bobs, mostly with the OG Bobs, I would say, with the original Bobs. I found that the diversity with having more discussion with the humans, and in the past also with the paths, with the Deltans, there was a lot more, back and forth and more dialogue between different species. So I was missing that a little bit in this book, I would say. What I did love is the plot lines with Iki and Day. The interaction between Iki and Day always felt very humorous, and I absolutely loved these chapters that we had about them and from their point of view. Now, what I would hope a little bit for the other books, and was also lacking a bit here, is Dennis E. Taylor is not taking this point of view a little bit further. So we only get point of views from the Bobs basically, and from the established Bobs, I would say. So it would be very much interesting to see the point of view of somebody that has had a stronger personality shift from the original Bobs. So it would be interesting to see the point of view, from somebody from Starfleet, or the point of view from Gandalf, from the gamers, or even going further, going to the point of view from Bridget, or what I also thought about, how about point of view from one of the Quinlins, Teresa, for example, or even the Quinlan AI, Annex. So who would he be thinking? How would he be narrating this kind of situation? So I was hoping for a bit more expansion on this kind of point of view, because I think that could bring more diversity into these books. However, what I have to say though is that after Heaven's River, I really disliked Hugh and the Skippies a lot. But in this book, I actually quite liked Hugh and the Skippies. They had this kind of, it was almost whimsical how big they can mess up now. But Hugh is really starting to grow on me, and I would love to have a point of view from him as well. Because the interesting thing with Hugh is he only started, coming as a character in book 4. Before, he didn't exist, but he already feels like this very own Bob. He feels very different to the other established Bobs. So I do like him a lot as a character, and I do like that, and I hope that he's here to stay. Hopefully we get a Hugh point of view in book number 6. Now, what is my conclusion here? So, I mean, looking at the ratings, so we have 5,800 ratings on Audible, with an average of 4.8. So clearly this book was very well received. Interestingly, it was a lot shorter again than the previous one. So Heaven's River was I think by 5 hours longer than all the other books in the series. So this one is shorter and more concise again. I think that helped it a lot as well. So obviously for me, you probably heard it out already, I absolutely loved Not Till We Are Lost. I think it's a wonderful continuation of the series. So from me, that's a clear 5 out of 5 stars for Not Till We Are Lost. And it's, I believe, the first 5-star book for me this year in 2024. And I am just hoping for a quick release of book 6, and I'm really excited to see where the journey will take us in the Bobiverse. But let me know your thoughts below. What did you think about the new Bobiverse book? What are your, what were your hopes and expectations for it? Is there something that you didn't like that you was going into? And how do you? What is very interesting for me is, how do you view Heaven's River like in this series now? Because for me, it feels like Heaven's River is so much different to all the other books. I still liked it a lot though, but it just feels very different than the other Bobiverse books. Also, I thought about possibly ranking the Bobiverse book. So if you would like to see a video about that, please also let me know in the comments below. Other than that, yeah, thank you so much for watching. Please drop me a comment, please subscribe and like this video, and see you in the next one. Bye guys.